Hello world and welcome to this video. In this short video we're going to be talking about the new React 17.0 release candidate. This just came out last night, I saw at least, or yesterday, August 10th, 2020. And I kind of want to just go over all of this, read over it, give you my thoughts and opinions. The biggest thing is that there are no new features, which is obviously why it's the title here, which is strange. Usually major versions have some new groundbreaking features. However, it's been 2.5 years since 16.0, which is a long time. But the main reason why they didn't do any new features, because they're kind of changing the way the versioning is working in React. They want to make it easier to upgrade React itself. Because previously, if you were on like version 14 and then you try to upgrade to 16, it was very hard. There were a lot of breaking things you had to change, and a lot of things you had to change in your code base just to do that. So, they're still working on a lot of new React features, but they're not part of it. But this React 17 is kind of like the precursor to releasing those bigger features, as they state here. So they have some gradual updates. So typically before, their upgrades have been all or nothing. Like I was saying, when you go from 14 to 16 or 14 to 15 even, or 15 to 16, it's just kind of you have to do the whole thing or don't upgrade at all. So 17 is supposed to enable you to do gradual updates, meaning that you could technically have different versions of React in your app. And it would still kind of work well. So you could have 17 and 16 or 17 and 18, and you don't have to upgrade your whole app at once, but you can do it piece by piece. For example, you might decide to migrate most of your app to React 18, but keep some lazy loaded dialog or subroute on React 17. You don't have to do gradual updates. You can do it all at once. That's still the best solution. And you can even like lazily load a React version if you are trying to use a feature that is not in the latest version. So let's see what else we got. So React 17 is a major release because there are potentially breaking changes. But so at Facebook, they have over 100,000 components, and they only had to change fewer than 20 when they upgraded React 17, which is that's pretty good. Usually, with a major version, you would have to update like at least 30 to 50% of that, which is enormous with a code base that big. So they do have an example repo of how to lazy load an older version of React if necessary. So that's kind of cool. You can check that out. Matters just GitHub repo. Yeah. Okay. So they postponed other changes until after React 17. The goal of this is to enable gradual updates. If upgrading to React 17 was too difficult, it would defeat the purpose of the whole version update. So let's talk about some of the changes that are actually happening. Changes to event delegation. Technically, it's always been possible to nest apps developed within different versions of React. However, it was rather fragile because of how the event system worked. So in React components, you typically write event handlers inline like so, which is the vanilla DOM equivalent of just adding an event listener. However, for most events, React doesn't actually attach them to the DOM nodes on which you declare them. Right, it attaches them to their own React node. So instead, React attaches one handler per event typed directly at the document instead of the DOM, which is kind of confusing because the DOM is a document object module, but it attached one handler per event type directly at the document node. This is called event delegation. In addition to its performance benefits on large application trees, it also makes it easier to add new features like replaying events, which was kind of nice for debugging things. So React has been doing event delegation automatically since its first release. When a DOM event fires on the document, React figured out which component to call, and then the React event bubbles upwards through your component. Behind the scenes, the native event has already bubbled up to the document level where React installs its event handlers. But this is a problem for gradual updates. If you have multiple React versions on the page, they all register event handlers at the top. This breaks event.stop propagation, that functionality. So if you have multiple versions, you can't do event.stop propagation because they're all registered at the top. If a nested tree has stopped propagating if a nested tree has stopped propagation of an event, the outer tree would still receive it. Yeah, because the native, when it says the native event had already bubbled up to the document level. So it's like you have the native event and the React event. And if you have different versions, as soon as an event happens, it bubbles all the way up to the document in the native level. But in React, you can stop it at each level. But if you have two different versions and you stop it in one version, the event is still going to go all the way up in your other version of React. It sounds confusing, but it kind of makes sense if there's different versions, and that's the way they did their event propagation and bubbling. So that would have made it difficult to nest different versions of React. Yeah, this concern is not hypothetical. The Atom editor ran into this 4 years ago. Atom editor by GitHub, which is kind of out of date now, but definitely still a real world problem. This is why we're changing how React events to the DOM. React attaches events to the DOM under the hood. In React 17, React will no longer attach event handlers at the document level. Instead, it will attach them to the root DOM container, which a React tree is rendered. Okay, so now you have the document object, and then let's say you have a div right here, right? And you just call that, div ID is React or Node or whatever. So if it attaches the events here, and then you have another React version nested down here, it's all gonna be, this React version is going to be hoisted to another div inside of your tree. That way, if you're on React 16, actually this guide kind of shows it a lot better than what I'm trying to explain. So in React 16 earlier, would do document.event listener for most events. However, now it's going to go only to the root element. That way, if you have another React version like right here and you do an on-click handler, this version is going to be scoped to the node. That way, it's not all scoped to the same document element, which makes it easier to propagate events from nested React versions. Interesting. So thanks to this change, it's now safer to embed a React tree managed by one version inside of a tree managed by a different version. Note, for this to work, both versions will need to be 17 or higher, which is why upgrading to React 17 is important. It is a stepping stone that allows for next gradual updates feasible. This also makes it easier to embed React into apps built with other technologies. For example, if your outer shell is written by jQuery, but newer code inside is written with React, the stop propagation functionality on the event inside the React code currently prevents it from reaching the jQuery code, as you would expect. This also works, not currently, it will prevent it from reaching the jQuery code, as you expect. This also works in the other direction. If you no longer want React and want to rewrite your app in jQuery, bless your soul. But you could do that. You can start converting the outer shell from React to jQuery. So essentially, this is just isolating React to the React version that it's at, instead of kind of binding it to the DOM and everything else that's connected to the DOM. So this is really good for isolating React. It's really good for microservices, things that use multiple technologies. Like I, for one, work on applications that use Java, JSPs, jQuery, vanilla JavaScript, React, multiple React applications on the page. So this is really good. This is going to help a lot of confliction between these different apps and technology that you have on your page or your app. So we've confirmed numerous problems reported over the year on our issue tracker related to integrating React with non-React code. Yeah, I've definitely ran into that as well. There can be a conflict between the two. So this should make it a little bit easier. You might be wondering if this breaks portals outside of the root container. The answer is React always listens to events on portal containers, so this is not really related to that. Fixing potential issues. As with any breaking change, it's likely some code will need to be adjusted. At Facebook, we had to adjust about 10 modules in total out of many thousands to work with this change. Okay. As I was saying before, that's really good. For example, if you had manual DOM listeners, you might expect them to catch all React events in React 16 and earlier. Even if you did call it event.stopPropagation, the DOM element would still listen to it because it's already natively at the document level. Yeah, but with React 17, the propagation would not go all the way through because it's actually stopping like it should. So this is kind of like It is a breaking change, but it's a breaking bug fix change that if you had a workaround before, it's no longer going to work. So document, so this is your document handlers would not fire. So yeah, if you do add event listener click, this is no longer going to be fired when the event comes from within a React component that calls event.stop propagation. If you're doing it document.add event listener, you could still do, like, if you have a React component here and you have a div here, you can still add a event listener within this div. And as long as you don't call event.stop propagation like right before it, it'll still get to that event listener. You just can't call event listeners on the document object and expect react.stop propagation to stop the event, which it will do now. It will now correctly stop the event, but it won't get to the document level, which is how it should be. Okay, so you can fix this code like this by converting a listener to use a capture phrase. This is interesting. To do this, you can pass capture is true as a third argument to document.eventListener. So this is kind of like a quick fix, but this receives all click events below. So this isn't just what bubbles up to the document. This is anything within the document at the first event that happens. Notice that this strategy is more resilient overall. For example, we'll probably fix existing bugs that happen when event propagation is called outside of a React event handler. In other words, event propagation in React 17 works closer to the regular DOM. Very good. Other breaking changes. We kept the changes to a minimum. It doesn't remove any of the methods that have been depreciated. However, it does include a few breaking changes that have been relatively safe in our experience. In total, we've had to adjust fewer than 20 out of 100,000 components because of them. So aligning with browsers. We've made a couple of smaller changes related to the event system. The on-scroll event no longer bubbles to prevent common confusion. There is this GitHub issue. What is this? Strange on-scroll behavior. On-scroll callback on parent element calls when children element is scrolled. Native listener working as expected. Yeah, so the scroll event was their own React scrolling event. It wasn't a native scroll event. So it no longer bubbles to prevent confusion, which means you're only going to have a scroll event on the DOM, on the React element that you specify. So for example, if you have your document object here and you have a div here that's scrollable, if you put an on scroll here in your ID and you have an on scroll listener on your document, the document on scroll is not going to get called if you're scrolling within the div, because it's not going to bubble out if it's in a React component. So React onFocus and onBlur events have switched to using the native focus in and focus out events under the hood, which more closely match React's existing behavior and sometimes provide extra information. So I'm not entirely sure how the focus in and focus out native events work, but it should actually give you a little bit more information on your event. So if you log the onFocus in a React method, you should see a little bit more information, I guess. Maybe it's more useful. It's just going to be a little bit closer to what the actual browser focus in and out methods are, or events are. Capture event phase, like click capture, now use real browser capture phase listeners. So again, just aligns React closer with the browser and improves interoperability. So note, although React 17 switched from focus to focus in for the onFocus event, this has not affected the bubbling. So the onFocus and onBlur will still bubble out. So because they've always bubbled out and it will continue to do so, it is a useful default. Yes, there's a sandbox here. You can kind of check the different use cases. So no event pulling. React 17 removes the event pulling optimization from React. It doesn't improve performance in modern browsers and confuses even experienced React users. Yeah, I have no idea what goes on when I do see some sort of event pulling happening. It's kind of magic, to be honest, what it looks like. But essentially this was for, IE in older browsers that it kind of added some optimization, but modern browsers don't really need this because they kind of handle this event management better. So if you were to do handle change, yes, I've definitely run into this. So if you pass an event directly from a DOM element into a React function and you use the set any kind of setter for like a state setter right here, and you try to access e.target.value, this crashes because it'll say like it does not or cannot pull value of undefined because e.target is undefined when it's within this set data, and that always threw me off. It was always you basically had to pull out event e.target.event before you go into this function. So it's a handle change e, then constant value is equal to e, and then you destructure the value out of e.target.value. So this, I definitely run into this, but this is because React reused the events object between different events for performance in old browsers and set all event fields to null in between them. Okay, with React 16 and earlier, you would have to call event.persist to properly use this event. Oh, so you don't have to pull it out, I guess. You could use e.persist. Did not know that. That would have been helpful, but it's still one line, one way or another. Or read the property you need earlier. Yeah, exactly. This is what I just suggested. So now you can do this. In React 17, this works fine, which is what you would expect. The old event pulling optimization has been fully removed, so you can read the event field whenever you need them. That is actually a nice bug fix that has thrown me for a loop many times. This is a behavior change, which is why it's being marked as breaking. But in practice, it shouldn't really break anything because if you had fixed this previously, the fix is still valid. Event persist still works, but now it's not really going to do anything. Yeah, exactly. So effect cleanup timing. We're making the timing of use effect cleanup function more consistent. So use effect, you do something and then you return. This is cleanups. Most effects don't need to delay screen updates, so React runs them asynchronously soon after the update has been reflected on the screen. So for the rare cases where you need to use an effect to block paint, for example, to measure and position a tooltip, you should use the use layout effect instead. However, the effect cleanup function, when it exists, used to run synchronously in React 16. We found that similar to component will amount being synchronous in classes, this is not ideal for larger apps because it slows down large screen transitions. Yeah, because if you run this synchronously, you're basically stopping the thread from everything else happening. So if you have an animation happening and you have this use effect that needs to clean up at a very specific time, you might start firing this animation and then you return the effect, and the return effect is either going to A, stop the animation from happening and cause a little glitch because there's so much happening at once because it's synchronous and it is blocking the node, or B, it's not going to actually run the cleanup function until after the animation is completed, depending on when you call your animation. So now it's going to be asynchronously, which means the cleanup will run after the screen has been updated, so you won't get that little stoppage in your animation. It really messes up the smoothness of animation, so this is definitely a good win for animations and transition. This mirrors how the effects themselves run more closely. In rare cases where you might want to rely on synchronous execution, you can switch to the use layout effect instead. So if you do want this specifically to run before your transition happens, then you do want to use the use layout effect. You might be wondering whether this means you'll be able to now fix warnings about the set state on unmounted components. Don't worry, React specifically checks for this case and does not fire set state warnings in the short gap before unmounting and the cleanup. So code canceling requests or intervals can always stay the same. That gets confusing for sure, but basically you don't have to worry about it. Additionally, React 17 executes the cleanup functions in the same order as the effects according to their position in the tree. Previously, this order was occasionally different. Okay, so now if I'm understanding this correctly, if you have two different use effects and you have cleanup functions in each one, the effects are going to run in order that they're in. So if this effect comes before this effect, this one's going to run first, and then this one will run first. But if they both are being cleaned up at the same time, then the first cleanup function will run, and then the second cleanup function will run. I guess previously that order was not always consistent. I've never run into that or noticed that, but there you go. So potential issues. We've seen a couple of components break with this change, although reusable libraries may need to test it more thoroughly. One example of problematic code may look like this, where you've taken some reference ref that you put on the DOM, and you say you're doing some method on that element, some setup method, and then you return some cleanup method. The problem is that the current is mutatable, so by the time the function cleans up, okay, that makes sense. So if you run this, some setup method, this could essentially do something that changes the reference.current, which would make some cleanup method potentially null, invalid, or do something else that you didn't want it to do. Because mutatable values are so inconsistent, which is why you shouldn't use them, you should always try to use immutable values. Because here's a case where if this reference, this is a mutable value, if this changes, then this is going to be unexpected and it's not going to do what you expect it to be. So we don't expect this to be a common problem because their ESLint rule always warned about it. Okay, so we did see a warning before, but now it's definitely a little bit better. Consistent errors for returning undefined. So in React 16, returning undefined has always been an error. If you have a component and you return nothing, you get this error. Nothing was returned from the render. In part, this is because it's easy to return undefined unintentionally. So if you don't return anything, this is basically the same thing as returning nothing, which is why they threw the error, because they want to tell you like, hey, this should be returning something, but it's not. So previously, React only did this for class and function, but it did not check the return values of forward ref and memo components. This was due to a coding mistake. So in React 17, the behavior of forward ref and memo is consistent with regular and class components. Returning undefined from them is an error. So previously, if you had a forward ref or a memo component, it would let you do this without throwing the error. However, now as you can see, this is going to throw an error if we forgot to write return, for example, in a forward ref, or in a memo, same thing. It'll show you an error if you're not returning anything from a memo or forward ref function. In case you do want to return or nothing, just return null. Okay, so native component stacks. So when you throw an error in the browser gives you a stack trace with JavaScript functions and their locations. However, JavaScript stacks are not enough to diagnose a problem because the React tree hierarchy can be just as important. You want to know not just that a button threw an error, but where in the React tree that button is. So error traces in React 16 and lower have been kind of hard to debug because a lot of times the stack happens somewhere randomly in React code and it's kind of useless because you're just like, what does this mean? I have no idea how code even got here. So supposedly this will help stitch together the regular JavaScript stack, the native, and the React fully symbolicated React components. This should basically be easier for a better stack trace. Should be more native to the browser, not just some React only stack where you're just like, you have to click through 20 different React errors when you walk through the debugger, which is like useless to most people because most of the time the error is not in the React code. You want to get to your code or you want to get to the JavaScript outside of the React. This should help with that. So basically just improving error handling. So component stacks are generated using different mechanism in React 17, stitches them together from the regular native JavaScript stacks. This lets you get the fully React component stacks in a production environment. Okay, so if you want more details, you can read over this, but essentially it's just reiterating with more detail. So removing private exports. Finally, the notable breaking change is we've removed some React internals that were previously exposed in other projects. For example, React Native for Web, which is funny, used to depend on some internals of the event system, but that dependency was fragile and used to break. So if you are importing anything that shouldn't be exported from React, it's going to break because they removed it because it shouldn't have been there in the first place. This means older versions for React Native for Web won't be compatible for React 17, which means if you're using React Native for Web, do not upgrade your dependency library of React to 17. But if once React Native for Web updates and it has a newer version, then it will work. Practice doesn't change because React Native for Web had to release new versions based on the internal React changes anyways. Okay. So if you're doing some weird stitching between React Native Web and React, stop that. You shouldn't be doing that. Additionally, we've removed this React test utils that simulate native helper methods. They've never been documented, don't quite do what the names work, so just removing bad stuff from the code. If you want a convenient way to fire native browser events and tests, check out the React testing library. Shout out to Kenzie Dodds. Nice. That's his library. Okay, so installation. So we encourage you to try out the release candidate soon and let them know any issues. Change logs. So this is actually all the things. One thing, this is probably the biggest one that I've seen that was useful. So they added this React JSX runtime and JSX dev runtime for new JSX transform. And that's basically a Babel plugin into the default Create React app library. What this allows you to do is you don't need to import React to use JSX. You know how on every single component you say import React from React and then you can write JSX. You no longer have to do that. So like platforms like Next.js had already solved this. So they're kind of bringing that into native React. So, or not native React, sorry, just React. So you don't need to import React now, pretty much ever. You can just import the use state, use effect, render to DOM. You can import the methods directly and you don't need to import React from React. That is quite nice, actually. What is this? This is just the Babel plugin here. I wonder, I did see this in a Reddit post from some people were talking about. There is a method you can use to, or a function that they give somewhere to run on all of your code base, and it will basically remove all of the import React from React. Misfocusing. Okay. So what else? They're building components out from native arrow frames. Yeah, allow to specify display name on context for improved stacks. Okay, so you can put a display name on your context. Oh man, that's helpful because I've seen in a lot of React trees where you have context, 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 context. You just have to like click through each one to find the one you're actually looking for. So if we can just specify display name, it'll be way easier to see which context you actually want. React DOM, delegate events to root instead of documents. So everything else should be pretty much what we were talking about. Disable console and the second render pass of dev mode double render. So you might have seen, yeah, 2 console logs in your browser. Seems like it was a mistake. Depreciate undocumented and misleading APIs. Don't call using timer. Okay. So these are all the actual code changes that happened. Pretty much everything that we talked about. Concurrent mode is still experimental, and they have some unstable methods in here. Definitely still got to hold off on concurrent mode, and some suspense. They're still working on it. It's a huge change, but they are definitely working on it as shown here. Okay, and that's it. So let me know if you have any questions down below. Let me know if there's anything you want to talk about, you want to know. I'll try to figure it out and help you out. So thanks so much for watching.